People say stability is the ultimate goal, right? A loving partner who adores you, a nice apartment, a future all mapped out. I had all of that with Liam. I had a man who remembered our anniversary without a calendar reminder, who made me soup when I was sick, and who talked about our future together with this steady, unwavering certainty that should have made me feel secure. And honestly, it was suffocating me. I'm Chloe. I'm 25, and 2 years ago, I was engaged to the perfect man. The problem was perfect is just another word for predictable. Liam is a civil engineer. That should probably tell you everything you need to know. His world is built on blueprints, calculations, and 5-year plans. He is kind. He is patient. He is the most dependable human being I've ever met. When we first got together 4 years ago, that dependability felt like a warm blanket. He was my rock after a series of chaotic relationships in college. But over time, the blanket started to feel heavy, like a weighted vest I couldn't take off. Our life had fallen into a rhythm, so precise, it was maddening. Every Tuesday was Taco Tuesday, with the same grocery list and the same mild salsa, because he didn't like anything too spicy. Every Saturday morning, without fail, we'd drive to the nature preserve and hike the same 5-mile loop. Every other Sunday was dinner at his parents' house, where we'd have the same pleasant surface-level conversations about his work and their garden. I was living in a beautiful, clean, beige-colored cage. I would scroll through Instagram and see my friend Maya backpacking through Southeast Asia, her face sun-kissed and alive. My old college roommate was living in a tiny, chaotic but cool apartment downtown, going to art shows and warehouse parties every weekend. They were living. I was existing. I was 25, but I felt like I was living the life of a 45-year-old who had long since given up on adventure. The final nail in the coffin of my youth was Liam's master plan the house. He was meticulously obsessively saving for a down payment on a 3-bedroom house in a good school district in the same suburb where he grew up. He had spreadsheets. I'm not kidding. Spreadsheets detailing our savings plan with projected interest rates, potential mortgage calculations, and property tax comparisons. He would show them to me, with this proud, excited gleam in his eyes, as if he were presenting me with the keys to a magic kingdom. To him, that spreadsheet was a roadmap to our beautiful shared future. To me, it looked like a blueprint for my prison. Each saved dollar, each coupon he clipped, each time he suggested we just eat in tonight to save money. It felt like another bar being welded into place around me. I loved him, I really did. But I was starting to realize that loving someone and wanting their life were two very different things, and I did not want his life. The change began on a random Thursday. My friend Maya, who had just gotten back from a 3-month stint in Europe, dragged me out. "We are not watching another nature documentary, Chloe," she'd said, pulling a leather jacket out of my closet that I hadn't worn in years. "You need to remember you're 25. Liam was at his weekly board game night with his engineering friends, a detail I conveniently forgot to mention to Maya. He'd kissed me goodbye at the door, reminding me not to stay out too late because he wanted to get an early start on mulching the garden beds on Friday. The sheer predictability of that sentence made me want to scream. Maya took me to a dive bar downtown, the kind of place with sticky floors, peeling posters on the walls, and the rich, yeasty smell of spilled beer. It was a world away from the clean, quiet wine bars Liam and I occasionally went to. I felt a nervous thrill, like I was breaking a rule I didn't even know existed. The place was hosting an open mic night, and after 2 painfully awkward comedians and a girl who played the ukulele, a man I'd never seen before got on stage. He introduced himself as Julian. He was tall and lean with messy dark hair that fell into his eyes and a faded t-shirt for some band I'd never heard of. He looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, but he carried himself with an easy confidence that immediately commanded the room's attention. He didn't say much, just picked up his worn acoustic guitar and started to play. And the music, it wasn't polished or perfect. It was raw and aching and full of a kind of desperate beauty. He sang about escaping a city of ghosts, about chasing horizons, about choosing a single passionate burning moment over a lifetime of quiet safety. Every word felt like it was aimed directly at me, a validation of the silent screaming I'd been doing in my head for months. I was completely captivated. After his set, I was still staring into my drink when a voice next to me said, "So did the Ghost City song hit a little too close to home?" I looked up, and it was him. Julian. Up close, He had the most intense green eyes I'd ever seen. I mumbled something about it being a good song, and he laughed. "Good is a boring word," he said, leaning against the bar. Was it true? I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I thought so," he said, his gaze making me feel like he could see right through me. "You have the eyes of someone who's dreaming of another place." We talked for an hour. He didn't ask what I did for a living or where I lived. He asked what I wanted to do if money wasn't an issue, what my favorite memory was, what song made me feel most alive. He told me he was a musician and a painter, that he lived in a chaotic loft with 2 other artists, and that he'd rather be broke and free than rich and chained to a desk. When I mentioned I used to paint a little in high school, his eyes lit up. "You should come by the studio sometime," he said. "No pressure, just to see the space. I bet you've still got it in you." I drove home that night feeling like I was buzzing with electricity. The quiet, dark streets of my suburb felt foreign and lifeless. I slipped into bed next to Liam, who was fast asleep, and I felt like an imposter, a spy who had just returned from another world. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "It was really great meeting you, Chloe." I wasn't kidding about the studio. Let me know. I deleted the message immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should have felt guilty, but all I felt was a spark of hope. I told myself for 2 days that I wouldn't text him. It was a stupid risk, a line I shouldn't cross. But the memory of his voice, the intensity in his eyes, it was a constant hum under the surface of my quiet life with Liam. On Saturday, while Liam was meticulously organizing the garage, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and texted Julian. I told him I was free on Tuesday evening if the offer to see his studio was still open. He replied almost instantly, "It's always open for you." I told Liam I was trying out a new vinyasa yoga class downtown that my friend Maya had recommended. The lie slid off my tongue with an ease that both thrilled and terrified me. That Tuesday, I drove my sensible sedan into a part of the city I rarely visited, a neighborhood of old brick warehouses converted into lofts and studios. Julian's space was on the top floor. It was huge and open with high ceilings and massive windows that looked out over the city lights. Canvases were leaning against every wall. Some finished, some just barely started. There were paint splatters on the wooden floor. 2 guitars in the corner next to a stack of amplifiers and a collection of empty wine bottles that he used as candle holders. It was messy, chaotic, and it felt more alive than any place I had ever been. He poured me a glass of cheap red wine into a jelly jar, and we talked for 3 hours. He showed me his paintings, bold, abstract, and full of a raw emotion that I felt in my gut. He played me a new song he was working on, and I felt like he was telling me all my own secrets. He asked about my old paintings, and when I shyly admitted I hadn't touched a brush in years, he didn't judge me. He just nodded and said, "The world has a way of making us forget what we love. The trick is to remember." With Liam, our conversations revolved around logistics, who was taking out the trash, what we needed from the grocery store, which bill was due next. With Julian, we talked about why we were alive. The yoga class became a weekly ritual. Then I invented a book club on Thursdays, so I could see him twice a week. My life split into 2 distinct worlds. There was my life with Liam, calm, stable, and increasingly beige. It was a world of shared calendars, sensible meals, and quiet evenings watching television. Then there was my secret world with Julian, a world of passionate debates, spontaneous walks through the city at 2 a.m., and the constant thrilling feeling that anything could happen. The cleaner and more organized my apartment with Liam felt, the more it seemed sterile and suffocating. The more I sank into the thrilling chaos of Julian's world, the more Liam's quiet stability began to feel like a personal failing. His kindness started to grate on me. I'd come home from an evening with Julian, my head full of art and music and philosophy, and Liam would have saved me a plate of dinner. "How was your book club?" he'd ask, with his sweet, open face, and I would feel a flash of white-hot irritation. I hated the lie. I hated that he believed it. I hated him for being so simple, so trusting, so completely oblivious to the person I was becoming. His touch, once a comfort, now felt like a cage. His practical questions felt like an interrogation. I started picking fights over nothing, creating distance, pushing him away, because every moment of his gentle, predictable love was a reminder of the wild, unpredictable world I was choosing over him. The breaking point didn't come from a dramatic discovery or a shouted accusation. It came on a quiet Tuesday evening, wrapped in the guise of good news. I had just come home from Julian's studio, My skin still smelling of turpentine and cheap incense, my mind buzzing with conversations about abstract expressionism. I felt alive, electric. I walked into our apartment to find Liam beaming at me from the sofa, his laptop open on the coffee table. "Chloe, come sit down," he said, his voice full of an excitement I hadn't heard in a long time. "I have the most amazing news. You're not going to believe it." I sat, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He turned the laptop towards me. On the screen was one of his infamous spreadsheets, but this one was different. It had charts, graphs, and a large bolded number at the bottom. "I finished the projections," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "With my raise and the extra I've been putting away, we're ahead of schedule. If we stick to the plan, we'll have our down payment in 6 months, Chloe. 6 months. Can you believe it? We can start actually looking at houses after the new year." He looked at me, his face a perfect picture of happy anticipation waiting for me to share in his joy, and all I felt was pure cold panic. The walls of the golden cage were closing in. The neatly planned out future he was so proud of felt like a death sentence. This was it. It was now or never. He saw the look on my face. His smile faltered. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy? This is everything we've been working for." "No, Liam," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is everything you've been working for." The confusion on his face was painful to watch. "What are you talking about? This is for us." "Is it?" I finally looked at him, and all the resentment I'd been swallowing for months came pouring out. "Or is it for the us in your spreadsheet? Did you ever once stop and ask me if a 30-year mortgage and a picket fence in the suburbs was my dream? Or did you just assume I'd be happy to slot into your perfect calculated life plan?" The fight escalated quickly from there. He was completely blindsided, trying desperately to understand what was happening. I accused him of planning my life without my consent, of seeing me as just another variable in his equation. I told him he didn't know the real me, that he had never even tried to understand my soul. "Your soul?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I thought our life together was what you wanted. I thought you were happy." "I'm not," I said, the words feeling both cruel and liberating. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in your spreadsheet." I twisted the engagement ring off my finger. It felt surprisingly light. I placed it on the coffee table next to the laptop that held the blueprint for a life I now knew I would never live. I think we need to break up." The word shattered the quiet air between us. Liam just stared at me, his face ashen. He started to cry, quiet heartbroken sobs that tore at something deep inside me. "Why?" he choked out. "What did I do wrong? We can change the plan. We can do whatever you want. Just tell me what to do to fix this." His pleading should have made me feel guilty, but instead it solidified my resolve. It was pathetic. He was willing to do anything to keep his perfect plan intact, while Julian was willing to risk everything to be free. I stood up and went to our bedroom, pulling a duffel bag from the closet. I moved on autopilot, throwing in clothes and essentials while he sat on the couch completely broken. "Please, Chloe, don't," he whispered as I walked to the front door. "I'm sorry, Liam," I said, and a small part of me meant it. "But I need to go find myself." It was a cliché, a coward's excuse, but it was all I had. I closed the door behind me, cutting off the sound of his quiet weeping. I stood in the silent, manicured hallway of our apartment building and took my first deep breath of the night. It tasted like freedom, a thrilling, terrifying, and absolute freedom. The guilt was a small, distant tremor beneath a tidal wave of relief. It was finally over. My real life could begin. I arrived at Julian's loft with a single duffel bag and a heart full of triumphant, reckless hope. He greeted me at the door with a passionate kiss, pulling me inside as if I were the only thing he'd been waiting for. That first month was a blur of everything I had been craving. We stayed up until 4 a.m., talking about the meaning of art, slept on a mattress on the floor because he hadn't gotten around to buying a bed frame, and ate cheap pizza straight from the box, while listening to old vinyl records. There were no spreadsheets, no schedules, no quiet, sensible evenings. It was chaotic and impulsive and felt for the first time in years completely and utterly real. My social media became a carefully curated gallery of my new authentic life. I posted a moody black and white photo of Julian playing his guitar captioned with a profound quote about living for your passion. I posted a picture of my feet dangling over the edge of the warehouse roof at sunset, captioned "Finally breathing." There were blurry photos from late-night concerts, artistic shots of his paint-splattered hands, and selfies of us drinking wine from coffee mugs. Every post was a declaration to the world, and more importantly to myself, that I had made the right choice. I was no longer the boring suburban fiancé. I was an artist's muse, living a life of passion and meaning. I saw through a mutual friend's post that Liam had deactivated his Facebook account, and I felt a smug sense of victory. He couldn't even stand to watch me thrive. But after the initial thrill began to fade, the realities of this authentic life started to set in. The charming chaos of the artist's loft began to feel less like a bohemian dream, and more like just a mess. Dirty dishes were always piled in the sink, empty beer bottles cluttered every surface, and there was a permanent lingering smell of stale smoke and turpentine. I found myself cleaning up after him and his two roommates, a task that was somehow more draining than any chore I had ever done in my meticulously clean apartment with Liam. The lack of privacy also started to wear on me. Julian's community of friends meant that people were always over crashing on the couch, using our things and holding impromptu jam sessions late into the night. The loft was a public space, and I had no quiet corner to call my own. The deep one-on-one conversations I'd cherished with Julian were now constantly interrupted. Then the money issue started. It was subtle at first. He'd suggest going to a new cafe, but then realize he'd forgotten his wallet, so I'd pay. He needed new guitar strings for a show. I bought them. He needed to pay his share of the studio rent. I lent it to him. I found myself dipping into the savings I had from splitting my assets with Liam, the very money from the boring life I had so desperately escaped just to fund our day-to-day existence. He was a free spirit, he'd say, unconcerned with materialistic things. But I was quickly learning that someone still had to pay the bills for that freedom. One night, as I was scrubbing a pot with a burnt-on food remnant from one of his roommate's cooking experiments, I had a fleeting traitorous thought. I pictured my old kitchen with Liam sparkling clean the dishwasher humming quietly. I remembered how he would always load it the right way, a habit I used to find irritatingly precise. I pushed the thought away, immediately angry at myself. This was the price of a real passionate life, I told myself. A little mess and financial instability was a small price to pay for not being bored to death. I was happy. I had to be. The honeymoon phase of my authentic life lasted for about 3 months. After that, I began to see the free-spirited artist I'd fallen for was in reality just a man who refused to grow up. His music career wasn't a struggle, it was a hobby. The open mic nights were fun, but they led nowhere. The hours he spent in his studio produced canvases that gathered dust in the corner, but never a single sale. When I'd gently ask about his plans about maybe booking a real gig, or trying to sell his art online, he'd get defensive. He'd talk about artistic integrity, about not selling out to the system, about waiting for the right gallery to discover him. His passion, which I had once found so intoxicating, now sounded like a convenient excuse for his profound lack of ambition. When things didn't go his way, he wasn't a resilient, struggling artist. He was a moody, petulant child who would blame the uninspired audiences or the commercialism of the art world for his failures. The financial reality crashed down hard and fast. One morning, I checked my bank account to pay my credit card bill and felt my stomach drop. The money from my split with Liam the nest egg I had subconsciously relied on was almost gone. It had been bled dry by 2 months of Julian's rent, his art supplies, his late-night bar tabs, and our shared grocery bills. Suddenly, my single salary from a job I didn't even like had to support 2 adults. The carefree, spontaneous dates were replaced by my own quiet internal panic. I started buying the cheapest groceries, lying awake at night, worrying about our bills, a feeling I hadn't experienced since I was a broke college student. I finally worked up the courage to have a real conversation with him. I tried to be gentle. "Julian," I said one evening, "I was looking at our finances and things are getting really tight. I was just thinking maybe you could look for a part-time job, just for a little while until your art starts selling." He exploded. It was a terrifying, instantaneous rage. "A job?" he sneered, his face contorted with disgust. "You want me to work at some coffee shop? Is that it, Chloe? You finally got tired of pretending." He started pacing the messy loft, gesturing wildly. "I knew this would happen. I knew you couldn't handle it. You don't want a real artist. You want a tame little provider to make you feel safe. You just want another Liam, another boring little man with his spreadsheets and his 5-year plan." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. He was using my past against me, twisting my desire for basic stability into a character flaw. "You're trying to kill my soul, just so you can feel secure," he yelled before grabbing his guitar and storming out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. He was gone for 2 days. I spent that time in a haze of anxiety and regret, oscillating between anger at him and a sickening fear that he was right, that I was too weak for this life. The definitive answer came on the 3rd day, not from him, but from a formal legal notice taped to our front door. It was an eviction notice. Our rent was 2 months overdue. He hadn't just been using my money for our daily expenses. He hadn't paid our landlord at all. I was sitting on the floor staring at the paper in my trembling hands when he finally strolled back in, smelling of whiskey. He saw the notice in my hand and his face showed no shock, no remorse, no panic. He just shrugged. "Well, I guess the universe is telling us it's time to move on," he said, with a casual airiness that made my blood run cold. This place was killing my vibe anyway. And in that one heartless moment, the entire fantasy of Julian shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't a passionate free spirit. He wasn't a misunderstood artist. He was a selfish, irresponsible child who used grand ideas about art and freedom as a shield to protect himself from the basic demands of adult life. The authentic life I had blown up my world for was a lie, a cheap illusion funded by the very stability I had thrown away. And I was now broke, unemployed, and about to be homeless, completely and utterly alone in the wreckage.